Captain Halcyon Seraph had never thought he'd end up on Mercury, let alone in a tin can masquerading as a research base. But life had a funny way of kicking you in the shins when you least expected it. Best not to piss in the wind, his grandmother used to say, which was advice he wished he could engrave on the console panel in front of him. Instead, he settled for eyeing the red blinking light that was currently more annoying than a mosquito at a blood bank. "What is it this time?" Seraph asked, not bothering to hide the exasperation in his voice. It was a rhetorical question. He knew damn well what it was, another vacuum exposure test scheduled today. His colleague, Dr. Mira Skull, piped up from across the room, fiddling with an array of switches that probably did something important but mostly looked like a tech geek's fever dream. "Oh, just the usual, throwing ourselves into the cold, unfeeling void and hoping we don't explode." Seraph smirked. "You make it sound like a party." "Wouldn't want to spoil the fun," Skull replied dryly, not looking up from her controls. The base was a claustrophobic jumble of corridors and rooms, all designed by people who clearly thought personal space was a luxury. Everything had a worn-out, grimy look that spoke of endless use and a shoestring budget. Exactly the kind of place you ended up when you were deemed expendable by the powers that be. "Vacuum exposure, eh?" said Bax, the team's engineer, who had a penchant for showing up exactly when you didn't want him around. "I'd rather stick my hand in a blender, but hey, we all make sacrifices." Seraph chuckled despite himself. "Shut up and make sure the systems don't conk out mid-test." Bax gave a lazy salute before diving into a panel that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned game of Will We Survive Today, to get the blood pumping." "Speaking of blood," Skull interrupted, now standing with a datapad in hand, "try not to spill any. We're running low on disinfectant." As if on cue, the door to the testing chamber slid open with a hiss, revealing a space that looked more like a medieval torture chamber than a place for scientific inquiry. The walls gleamed with the sterile sheen of impending doom. "Step right up, folks," Seraph announced with mock enthusiasm. "The ride of a lifetime awaits." "Captain, you really know how to sell it," Skull responded, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. The test subject, an unfortunate bastard named Jace, shuffled in, looking like a man on his way to the gallows. He glanced at Seraph, who offered nothing more than a shrug. "Courage, my friend," Seraph said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Jace snorted. "If I end up a pancake, tell my wife I was thinking about her." "Sure thing," Bax replied. "Though I'll probably just tell her you were thinking about cake." Jace rolled his eyes as he stepped into the chamber, the door sealing behind him with a finality that was hard to ignore. Meanwhile, far above Mercury's surface, the Zeathians watched. They were a curious bunch, all tentacles and telepathy, possessing a detached curiosity about these hairless bipeds who seemed hell-bent on flinging themselves into the void for kicks. "They are doing it again," one Zeathian remarked, its mind voice dripping with skepticism. "Fascinating creatures," another replied, its appendages twitching in what could only be described as an alien shrug. "Their resilience is remarkable if not completely baffling." "Resilience or insanity?" the first inquired. "A fine line," the second noted. Back in the base, the countdown began. Jace, standing center stage in the vacuum chamber, looked like a mannequin dressed in human anxiety. The air around him was pumped out with the precision of a surgeon cutting into flesh. "How you holding up, Jace?" Seraph's voice crackled through the intercom. "Oh, splendid," Jace replied, his sarcasm cutting sharper than any scalpel. "Just waiting for my eardrums to pop like cheap balloons." "You're a hero," Skull chimed in. "Or you will be, assuming you don't die." The data screens flickered with numbers that made sense to anyone who had spent more than a weekend cramming their head full of jargon. For the rest, it was just a light show. "Pressure dropping," Bax narrated as if he were announcing a sports game. "And he's still alive." "Barely." "Good man," Seraph muttered under his breath. He leaned closer to the intercom. "Jace, you still with us?" "Define with," Jace shot back, his voice strained but intact. Alive and cursing, Seraph clarified. Then yes. The Zeathians continued their observation with growing concern. Do they find this entertaining? One asked. Perhaps it is a ritual, another suggested. Or a test of strength. Humans are known for their strange customs, a third commented, its mental tone tinged with a hint of admiration. Strange is an understatement, the first concluded as they continued to watch through the ethereal lens of their telepathic connection. Back inside the chamber, Jace was doing his best interpretation of a rag doll, and the team watched with the kind of morbid interest usually reserved for roadkill. All right, Jace, Skull instructed, we're bringing you back in. Try not to faint. I'll do my best, Jace grunted. As the pressure stabilized and air hissed back into the chamber, Jace flopped to his knees, gasping like a fish on dry land. Skull and Bax exchanged looks that said more than any words could. Another day, another dollar, Bax quipped as he powered down the chamber. If only, Seraph replied, watching as Jace staggered out, clutching his side like he expected his organs to spill out. You did good, Jace. Good, Jace wheezed. I feel like I've been chewing glass. Comes with the territory, Seraph said with a pat on his shoulder. Welcome to Mercury. He watched Jace limp away before turning back to his team. What's next? He asked, though he wasn't exactly brimming with excitement. More tests, Skull answered, her voice tinged with the fatigue of someone who had long since stopped caring about the why of it all. Can't wait, Seraph said. Just another day in paradise. The Zeathians, their curiosity now piqued beyond mere observation, pondered deeper questions about these humans and their relentless quest for survival. Perhaps we should intervene, one suggested. Or perhaps, another countered, we should let them teach us what it means to be truly alive. As the humans continued their grim work below, the Zeathians pondered the nature of madness and genius, watching with both trepidation and awe. And Seraph, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders, glanced at the blinking light and sighed. Whoever said space was the final frontier clearly didn't know when to quit, he muttered to himself, already dreading the next round of tests. Inside the base, the air was thick with an uneasy mix of anticipation and resignation, the kind you feel when you realize that the light at the end of the tunnel might just be an oncoming train. Yet for all their grumbling and dark humor, the team knew they were touching the edges of something monumental. Think the aliens are watching us? Bax asked, half joking but with a tinge of genuine curiosity. If they are, Seraph said, looking up as if trying to pierce the layers of metal and rock above him, I hope they're taking notes on what not to do. Or maybe, Skull rejoined, they're wondering if we're worth saving. Depends on the day, Bax replied, earning a chuckle from the rest of the team. As they packed up their equipment and prepared for yet another sleepless night, there was a shared sense of camaraderie in the absurdity of it all. Yes, they were just cogs in a vast, uncaring cosmic machine, but damn if they weren't going to be the best damn cogs they could be. Somewhere far above, the Zeathians continued their watch, pondering questions of existence, resilience, and the curious tenacity of these human creatures who dared to dance on the edge of oblivion. Perhaps, one Zeathian mused aloud, there is more to them than meets the eye. And as the universe spun on, indifferent to the struggles of the small and the mighty alike, the humans prepared for another day of madness under the unrelenting gaze of the sun. Captain Seraph, with a weary sigh and a grim smile, knew that whatever came next, he'd face it head-on. After all, when you were already in the furnace, you might as well get comfortable. Here's to another day, he murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the vast, uncaring void above. And so continued the grim, darkly humorous dance of humanity on the unforgiving surface of Mercury, observed by alien eyes but driven by a uniquely human desire, to survive, to thrive, and above all to laugh in the face of impending doom. Somewhere high above Mercury, the Zeathian monitoring station hovered in space like a cosmic fishbowl, its occupants staring at the antics below with something that could have been awe or disbelief, if tentacles were capable of such expressions. Overseer Zorath, a seasoned Zeathian who had seen more human absurdity than he cared to admit, twitched his main appendage as the council convened. "These humans," Zorath began, his mental voice echoing around the chamber with a mixture of irritation and bewilderment, "they're becoming increasingly unpredictable. Unpredictable or just plain nuts." Ilorth, his second-in-command, replied, an appendage lazily tapping against the transparent surface of the station. "I mean, voluntarily exposing themselves to a vacuum is hardly textbook sanity." "True," Zorath mused, "but there's something unnervingly resilient about them, like cockroaches, only with more enthusiasm for self-destruction." The chamber filled with a collective hum of agreement, punctuated by the occasional skeptical tendril wave. The Zeathians, for all their superior intellect and telepathic prowess, were struggling to categorize these human creatures. They had adapted to space faster than anticipated, which was both impressive and, frankly, a little terrifying. "Should we be concerned?" asked Plorax, the council's analyst, who had a penchant for seeing doom and gloom in even the sunniest projections. "Their technological advancements might soon surpass our predictive models." "Concerned," Zorath echoed, a hint of incredulity in his tone. "Plorax, my friend, concern doesn't even begin to cover it. If they keep up this pace, they might eventually pose a legitimate threat. Or they'll just implode spectacularly," Ilorth interjected. "Humans have a knack for that too. Just when you think they're about to achieve something, they trip over their own feet." Zorath considered this, an appendage stroking his sensory organ in contemplation. "Still, it wouldn't hurt to be prepared. Perhaps we should accelerate our own research into their weaknesses. We can't afford to underestimate them." "Underestimate," Plorax said, his tone a mix of skepticism and humor. "If anything, we've overestimated their ability to not accidentally kill themselves." The chamber buzzed with a mental chuckle, a rare moment of levity amidst the growing tension. For the Zeathians, whose existence was built on predictability and control, the chaotic nature of humanity was as fascinating as it was alarming. Meanwhile, on the dusty surface of Mercury, the humans in the research base continued their daily grind, blissfully unaware of the watchful eyes above. Captain Seraph sat hunched over the console panel, coffee in one hand, a look of mild resignation on his face. The day had barely begun, and already he felt the weight of 1,000 bureaucratic inanities starting to pile up. "Morning, sunshine," Bax greeted, strolling into the control room with a swagger that suggested he either had no idea how dire their situation was, or he simply didn't care. "How's life in the universe's armpit?" Seraph glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, just another beautiful day on Mercury. Nothing like the sun trying to roast you alive to really make you appreciate air conditioning. Right? If only our air conditioning was more than a fan with delusions of grandeur," Bax quipped, plopping down into the seat next to Seraph. "What's on the docket today, boss?" "The usual," Seraph replied. "More tests, more data, more wondering why the hell we signed up for this death trap." "Hey, I signed up for the adventure," Bax said with a grin. "Figured it would make a great story if I survived." "Big if," Seraph muttered, tapping a few buttons on the console to bring up the day's schedule. "Anyway, Skull's got some new variables she wants to try out on the exposure tests. Jace isn't too keen on being the guinea pig again, but you know how it is." "Yeah, just tell him it's character building or some crap," Bax suggested. "Always worked on me." Seraph snorted, though the amusement was short-lived. Despite the bravado, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of being caught between a rock and a hard place. The mission was important, or so he'd been told, but the price of importance was often high. Back in the Zeathian station, Overseer Zorath initiated a network-wide alert. "We must increase our surveillance," he declared, his mental tone leaving no room for argument. "It's imperative that we understand their motivations and resilience." Ilorth, I want a full analysis of their recent activities. Ilorth nodded, tendrils consulting the holographic displays in front of him. Already on it. I'll have the data compiled by the next Earth cycle. And Plorax, Zoreth continued, I need projections. Worst-case scenarios, best-case scenarios, and everything in between. Of course, Plorax replied, though his mental voice carried a hint of resignation. The worst-case scenarios were his favorite, but even he was growing weary of the constant doom forecasting. As the council disbanded, Zorath allowed himself a moment of introspection. Humans, such odd creatures. Watching them was like viewing a slow-motion explosion. You couldn't look away, even though you knew it would end in disaster. On the surface, Seraph and his crew went about their tasks with the kind of gallows humor only those who'd resigned themselves to the absurdity of life could muster. Dr. Mira Skull was in her element, surrounded by an array of switches and data screens, her sharp eyes flicking over numbers and graphs with the detached focus of someone who had long ago accepted that sanity was relative. "All right, Jace," she called out, not bothering to look up from her monitors. "Ready for round two." Jace, who had only just recovered from the previous ordeal, groaned in protest. "Sure, why not? I love feeling like a science experiment." "Think of it as a free spa treatment," Bax chimed in, adjusting a few settings on the console. "A little vacuum therapy never hurt anyone." "Much, besides," Seraph added. "If you survive, you can add it to your resume. Survived Mercury research base with only minor psychological trauma." Jace rolled his eyes but grudgingly took his place in the chamber, the door hissing shut behind him. "Just promise me that if I die, you'll use the opportunity to finally fix the coffee machine." "No promises," Bax replied, flashing an apologetic grin through the observation window. As the pressure dropped and the experiment began, the Zeathians continued their observation, their collective anxiety growing. Overseer Zorath, watching from his station, couldn't help but wonder about the humans' enigmatic tenacity. They were unpredictable, irrational, and had a tendency to laugh in the face of imminent doom, a trait that was both baffling and oddly inspiring. "Perhaps there's more to them than meets the eye," Zorath mused aloud, echoing the sentiments of his fellow Zeathians. "Perhaps we have much to learn from them, as hazardous as that may be." Ilorth, compiling data on the humans' antics, looked up with a skeptical wave of his appendage. "Or maybe they're just a cautionary tale." "Time will tell," Zorath replied, his gaze fixed on the blue-green orb that was Earth, suspended in the vastness of space, a reminder that while the universe was vast and indifferent, it was the small, unpredictable moments that often defined it. Back on Mercury, the test concluded with the usual fanfare of relief and exhaustion. Jace stumbled out of the chamber, greeted by the half-hearted applause of his crewmates. "You did it," Skull said, handing him a cup of water. "Congratulations on not dying." "Thanks," Jace muttered, gulping down the water like a man starved for more than just hydration. "I'll add it to my list of life achievements, right between survived high school and didn't get eaten by a bear." "So, what now?" Bax asked, shutting down the equipment with a practiced ease that belied the chaos that often surrounded them. "Now," Seraph replied, "we take this data, send it back to the folks who actually get paid to think, and hope they figure out something useful. Then we do it all over again tomorrow." "How comforting," Skull remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Such is life," Seraph replied, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "Another day in paradise, right?" As the crew settled in for yet another monotonous evening on Mercury, the Zeathians continued their silent vigil, pondering the strange resilience of their human counterparts. Though they couldn't quite understand it, they couldn't deny the odd fascination it held. And so, the dance continued, humans battling the elements and their own shortcomings, while far above, unseen eyes watched, wondered, and worried. In the end, the question wasn't just if humanity would survive Mercury, but rather what they might become if they did, and whether the universe was ready for that possibility. The Mercury Research Base, affectionately known by its inhabitants as the Oven, was as lively as a funeral. Captain Halcyon Seraph sat slumped in his chair, feet propped up on the console panel, eyes locked on the monitor as if waiting for it to apologize for existing. The morning's coffee had done its job as well as a placebo, and he was bracing for another day of cosmic absurdity. "Hey, Cap," Bax called out as he entered, timing his arrival perfectly between crises, a skill he had honed to an art form. "How's the plan to conquer the universe from this hellhole going?" "Still in the planning stages," Seraph replied, not bothering to look up. "I'm thinking we'll start by figuring out why our toilet only flushes when it rains on Earth." Ambitious. "I like it," Bax said, plopping down into a chair that had seen better days, probably before it ended up on Mercury. "How's Mira and her science circus?" "Same as ever. A whirlwind of data and despair. Speaking of, where is our beloved mad scientist?" Before Seraph could finish, Dr. Mira Skull stormed in, her datapad clutched like a talisman against the idiocy that surrounded her. "Morning, gentlemen." "Ready to pretend we're making progress always," Seraph said, barely suppressing a grin. "What exciting new ways have you devised to lose our sanity today?" "Well," Skull said, tapping her datapad with grim determination, "we'll start with Jace surviving another exposure test. If he doesn't implode, we'll celebrate by fixing the coffee machine." Bax snorted. "That's what I call motivation." As if on cue, the base lights flickered, a subtle warning that the universe was about to throw another wrench into their precariously balanced plans. Seraph sighed, the kind of sigh reserved for impending doom or Monday mornings. "Oh," Bax said, glancing at the flickering lights like a gambler watching a roulette wheel. "You think it's the usual, or something new and exciting?" "Let's go with something new," Skull replied, sarcasm dripping from her words like mercury from a broken thermometer. "Keeps us on our toes." Seraph pushed himself up from his chair with the enthusiasm of a man condemned to a lifetime of paperwork. "Let's check it out before it decides to kill us." The trio made their way to the control room, where the base's main systems were conveniently situated to provide maximum inconvenience. The console panel was alive with warning lights, a festive display of cosmic chaos. "What's the damage?" Seraph asked, eyeing the panel like it had personally offended him. "Looks like a solar flare's on its way," Skull said, reading off her datapad. "Should hit us in about, 5 minutes. Give or take, of course it is," Seraph muttered. "Because why wouldn't the sun want to roast us more thoroughly? On the bright side, it'll disrupt communications," Bax offered. "So at least we won't have to talk to Earth for a while." "Silver linings," Seraph said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "All right, let's switch to backup systems and hope they're feeling cooperative." The Zeathians, floating comfortably in their monitoring station above, watched the humans' plight with a mixture of concern and begrudging admiration. Overseer Zoreth observed the unfolding drama with the detachment of a scientist watching lab rats plot an escape. "Is it me, or do they always seem to be one step from disaster?" Ilorth asked, his appendages hovering over the holographic displays. "It's not just you," Zoreth replied, "but somehow they manage to stumble through. It's like watching a toddler juggle knives." "Impressive," Ilorth suggested, "or terrifying," Zoreth countered. "Depends on your point of view." Back on Mercury, the crew scrambled to implement their emergency protocol, which, in true human fashion, was more of a suggestion than a plan. Seraph barked orders as Skull and Bax worked to stabilize the systems, their movements a dance of frantic efficiency. "All right, we're on backup," Skull announced, her fingers flying over the array of switches. "Let's hope it holds, hope." "Is that all we've got?" Jace, having overheard the commotion, wandered in looking as if he'd been promised a vacation and given a root canal instead. "Hope and duct tape," Bax said, not missing a beat. "Our two most reliable tools," figures, Jace grumbled. "What's happening anyway?" "Solar flare," Seraph replied. "Just another day in paradise," Jace shrugged. "As long as it doesn't fry us, I can live with it." "Always the optimist," Skull muttered as she double-checked the systems. "Let's just make sure nothing goes critical." In the Zeathian station, Plorax was compiling his latest report, his mental processes a whirl of probabilities and worst-case scenarios. "They're improvising again," he noted, a hint of disbelief in his mental tone. "Of course they are," Ilorth replied. "It's what they do. Improvisation is practically their superpower or a flaw." Plorax wondered aloud. "Depends on if they survive," Zorath said, observing the humans' frantic activity. "But they've done it before." Back at the base, the countdown to the solar flare ticked down with all the subtlety of a ticking bomb. Seraph and his crew watched the monitors, tension crackling in the air like static electricity. "Brace yourselves," Seraph said, gripping the edge of the console as if it might float away. "Here it comes." The solar flare hit with the force of a cosmic sledgehammer, the base shuddering as systems flickered and threatened to fail. Lights dimmed, alarms wailed, and the air grew thick with the pungent scent of burning circuits. "Hold it together, baby," Bax whispered to the console, his voice a mix of prayer and profanity. The crew clung to their stations, riding out the storm with the grim determination of those who had long since learned that complaining didn't change a damn thing. Finally, the tremors subsided, leaving the base in an uneasy silence broken only by the occasional sputter of failing machinery. "We alive?" Jace asked, looking around as if surprised he still existed. "Barely," Seraph replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Skull status report. Backup systems held," Skull said, sounding as relieved as someone who'd narrowly avoided a tax audit. "We're operational, but it's going to take some work to get back to full capacity." "Great," Seraph said, letting out a long breath. "Just great." In the Zeathian station, Zorath watched the humans' recovery with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "They did it again," he said, as if trying to convince himself it was possible. "Tenacious little creatures, aren't they?" Ilorth said, his mental tone a blend of admiration and disbelief. "Or just lucky," Zorath replied. "But I suppose luck is a skill in its own right." Plorax, ever the pessimist, shook his sensory appendage. "Luck runs out eventually. But for now, they've survived." Back on Mercury, the crew set to work repairing the damage, their banter a welcome distraction from the looming threat of death by cosmic forces. "So," Jace said, wielding a spanner with all the grace of a man who'd rather be elsewhere, "any chance we'll get hazard pay for this?" "Sure," Bax said, grinning. "Right after we get the gold-plated toilets." "Dream big," Skull added, her hands busy rewiring a burned-out circuit. "It's all we've got." Seraph watched his team work, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Despite the chaos, despite the danger, they continued to fight their way through the madness of Mercury. Each day was a new battle, but at the end of it all they were still standing. And as the Zeathians watched from above, the humans below carried on, defying expectations and the universe's best efforts to wipe them out. Whether it was luck, skill, or sheer stubbornness, Seraph and his crew had one undeniable truth on their side: they weren't beaten yet. "Another day, another disaster averted," Seraph said, offering a hand to Jace, who had managed to wedge himself under a control panel. "Barely," Jace replied, accepting the help with a grunt. "But hey, I'm still here." "That's the spirit," Bax said, clapping him on the shoulder. "As long as we're breathing, we're winning." "Winning might be a stretch," Skull said, her voice as dry as the planet's surface. "Surviving, maybe." "Semantics," Seraph said, waving a dismissive hand. "What's important is we're still in the game." In the great cosmic fishbowl above, Zorath and his fellow Zeathians pondered the resilience of their human counterparts. Each challenge faced, each crisis survived, added to the enigma that was humanity. They were unpredictable, irrational, but undeniably fascinating. "Perhaps there's more to them than we thought," Zorath mused, watching the tiny figures on the surface below carry on with their tasks. "Or perhaps they're just lucky," Ilorth suggested. "Either way," Plorax said, his mental tone grudgingly respectful, "they've earned their place in the universe." And so, the day ended as it often did on Mercury, with the crew of the research base looking to the stars, wondering what fresh insanity tomorrow would bring. But whatever it was, they'd face it together, armed with humor, determination, and the stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. For Seraph and his crew, the struggle was far from over, but neither was the adventure. As long as they had breath in their lungs, they'd keep fighting, keep striving, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to conquer the madness of the cosmos. But until then, there was work to be done, and as the sun set over the barren landscape, they returned to their tasks with a renewed sense of purpose. Because in the end, survival was the ultimate victory, and on Mercury, every day was a battle worth fighting. The Mercury Research Base, affectionately known as the Oven for the simple fact that it cooked its residents like rotisserie chickens, was having another one of those days. The kind where the universe decided to throw one more cosmic wrench into their finely tuned chaos just to see what would happen. If Seraph was honest, he'd say it felt like every other damn Tuesday. Halfway through duct taping a panel to keep it from falling apart. Again, Seraph felt a familiar twinge behind his eyes, a sensation akin to having a migraine while simultaneously getting a lobotomy. He muttered something under his breath that might have been either a curse or a prayer, but with him, it was usually both. "Anyone else getting a mental wedgie?" he asked, rubbing his temples with the vigor of someone trying to erase a bad memory. Dr. Skull looked up from her datapad, her expression one of resigned annoyance. "Telepathic waves," she said, as if discussing the weather. "The Zeathians are up to their usual hijinks." "Ah, the cosmic equivalent of a prank call," Bax said, sauntering in with the swagger of a man who'd perfected the art of doing nothing while looking busy. "As if we don't have enough to deal with," Jace added, giving up on the panel and letting it hang by its last tether. "Do they ever get tired of poking us with their mental sticks?" "Apparently not," Skull replied, her fingers dancing over an array of switches with deadly precision. "But it's cute they try." Up above, in their fishbowl monitoring station, Zorath and his crew were indeed trying. The Zeathians had decided today was a good day to test the resilience of their favorite human lab rats. "Is it working?" Ilorth asked, tilting his appendages as if that would help him see better. "They're squirming, but they haven't broken yet," Zorath replied, a hint of frustration creeping into his otherwise even tone. "Humans," Plorax muttered, his attention divided between the humans' antics and the endless stream of data scrolling past his displays. "They're like cockroaches. You can step on them, but they just keep going. Always with the optimism, Plorax," Ilorth said, sarcasm dripping like acid from his words. Back on Mercury, Seraph and his crew were doing their best to ignore the mental gymnastics being inflicted upon them. Years of exposure to cosmic anomalies had given them a certain mental fortitude, although some might call it stubbornness. "Feels like a hangover I didn't earn," Seraph grumbled, wishing he could at least have the pleasure of blaming it on a night of questionable decisions. "Don't give them the satisfaction," Skull advised, like a coach rallying a team at halftime. "Just focus on something else. Like fixing the coffee machine. That's a priority if I've ever heard one," Bax chimed in. "No caffeine, no hope." Jace, meanwhile, was trying to will the panel to stay up with the power of his mind. "If we survive this, we should get a medal," he said. "Or at least a vacation." "I think surviving is its own reward," Bax replied, thumping the side of the console like it owed him money. As the Zeathians continued their telepathic assault, the humans dug in their heels, metaphorically thumbing their noses at their overseers. The struggle was as much a part of their daily routine as the unreliable toilet and the constant threat of implosion. "They're still at it," Zorath noted, a touch of admiration mixing with his exasperation. "They don't give up, do they?" "Persistent," Ilorth agreed. "Like a bad case of space lice, or possibly just too dumb to know when to quit," Plorax suggested, unable to resist one last jab. Seraph's team soldiered on, battered by the mental waves but unbroken. It wasn't the first time they'd been subjected to the Zeathians' mind games, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But if nothing else, they were experts at rolling with the punches. "This is what you signed up for, right?" Skull said, a sardonic twist to her lips as she worked. "Yeah," It was in the job description, Seraph answered. Somewhere between handle volatile chemicals and occasionally dodge death rays. Perks of the job, Jace added, finally giving up on the panel and turning his attention to more pressing concerns, like locating the last pack of emergency rations. As the Iors dragged on, the mental pressure began to ease, the Zeathians presumably deciding that today's entertainment was over. For now, at least. "They've stopped," Skull observed, her tone suggesting she was less than impressed with their alien overlord's antics. "Good," Seraph said, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Now maybe we can get back to the important stuff, like fixing the coffee machine," Bax reminded everyone as if they could ever forget. "You've got your priorities straight," Jace agreed, nodding knowingly. In the great cosmic fishbowl above, Zorath and his crew reviewed their day's work with mixed feelings. The humans had once again defied their expectations, and the Zeathians were left pondering what it all meant. "They'll be back at it tomorrow," Ilorth noted, not unkindly. "Yes," Zorath agreed, a strange sort of respect in his voice. "They will." And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon on Mercury's barren landscape, the crew of the research base prepared for another day in their ongoing cosmic struggle. They might not have gold-plated toilets, hazard pay, or even a reliable coffee machine, but they had each other. And sometimes, against all odds, that was enough. "Another day, another near disaster averted," Seraph said, looking around at his team with something akin to pride. "Feels like every day," Jace replied, stretching out the kinks in his back. "Lucky us," Skull said, her words laced with her usual dry humor. In the end, it was the human spirit, stubborn, irreverent, and impossibly resilient, that kept them going. That and the unlikely hope that tomorrow might be just a little better, or at least no worse. And for the Zeathians watching from above, it was clear that these humans, with their strange blend of humor and grit, were a force to be reckoned with. They might not be perfect, but they were undeniably fascinating. And maybe, just maybe, they were worth keeping an eye on. So the day ended as it often did, with the crew of the Mercury research base looking to the stars, unbowed and unbroken, ready to face whatever cosmic chaos tomorrow might bring. Because in the grand scheme of things, surviving against the odds was its own kind of victory. And for Seraph and his crew, that was more than enough. The Mercury research base was having one of those days that made you wish you'd stayed in bed back on Earth, even if it was a bit cramped and smelled like stale socks. The Zeathians, those cosmic pranksters, were taking their usual mental poking up a notch. It felt like they'd gone from pranking to pulling out the heavy artillery, like some interstellar frat party getting out of hand. Captain Halcyon Seraph rubbed the back of her neck, feeling the familiar itch of mental interference, but this time it was like wearing a wool sweater in a heat wave. "Great," she muttered. "Just when I thought my brain couldn't feel any more like scrambled eggs." Dr. Mira Skull, ever the voice of exasperated reason, was furiously tapping on her datapad. "Fantastic. We've upgraded from telepathic nudges to full-on mental sledgehammers. I hope our Zeathian friends brought lube. Why bother with subtlety when you can just smack someone over the head with a cosmic bat?" Bax added, lounging nearby with all the urgency of a person waiting for paint to dry. Jace, giving up on the panel he'd jury-rigged for the umpteenth time, looked around at the team. "Anyone else seeing bright lights and colors that aren't there? Or is that just me finally losing it?" "Could be both," Seraph replied, squinting like she could somehow see through the telepathic fuzz. "These mental assaults are like a bad acid trip without the fun bits. Just hold on, we've been through worse." "Worse," Skull scoffed. "Like that time the toilet decided to become a geyser. Or when we almost got cooked alive because someone forgot to reset the thermal shields." "Yeah," Jace nodded. "Good times." On the Zeathian monitoring station, Zorath watched the human ants scurry with a mix of curiosity and something that might have bordered on respect if he'd been capable of it. "They're really hanging in there." "Impressive." Ilorth gave a telepathic shrug, a sort of meh that only worked in the Zeathian language. Maybe they're too stubborn to realize they should give up. Or too stupid, Plorax suggested, though there was a hint of grudging admiration in his words. Back on Mercury, Seraph was doing her best to keep morale from slipping into the kind of abyss that would make a black hole seem like a kiddie pool. Listen up, people. We've faced down weirder and we've survived. Remember, we're the ones who made a toilet flush by waiting for rain on Earth. We can handle a little mind warping. Skull was not convinced. Captain, with all due respect, I'd rather deal with plumbing issues than have my brain turned into tapioca. Bax nodded sagely. I second that. Except maybe the time the coffee machine decided to spit boiling liquid at us for fun. Jace was staring intently at a panel, as though sheer force of will could keep it from exploding. Should we be doing something? I mean, besides standing around like morons waiting for our brains to melt? Good question, Seraph said, trying to project a confidence she didn't quite feel. The best defense is a good offense, right? Let's try to push back. Skull, can we rig something, anything, to counter this telepathic garbage? Skull furrowed her brow, considering the idea as if it were a particularly difficult equation. I could try to boost the signal from our comms array, maybe create some static noise. It might not do much, but it's better than sitting here with our thumbs up. We get it, Seraph interrupted. Do it. Jace, help her out. Jace nodded, moving to assist Skull, though his enthusiasm for the task was about as vibrant as a dead battery. Right, because I always wanted to be a brain janitor. As the team scrambled to put together their makeshift mental defense, the Zeathians observed with increasing interest. Are they fighting back? Ilorth asked, tilting his head in a way that might have been considered cute if he weren't an alien observer with questionable intentions. Looks like it, Zorath admitted, a touch of admiration in his otherwise detached tone. They are nothing if not resourceful, or reckless, Plorax countered. But you have to admire their spirit. The humans were anything but beaten. Skull and Jace connected wires, rerouted power, and generally made a mess of things, but in a way that suggested they might actually know what they were doing. All right, Skull said, dusting off her hands. Let's see if we can't make a little noise of our own. The system hummed to life, a low thrumming sound that vibrated through the base, a counter-signal designed to disrupt the Zeathians' telepathic frequency. It wasn't pretty and it definitely wasn't subtle, but it was all they had. Here goes nothing, Seraph said, watching the readouts with bated breath. For a moment, the pressure on their minds eased like a weight being lifted, and the strange colors and lights faded, replaced by the blessed clarity of their own thoughts. Did it work? Jace asked, hesitantly hopeful. Feels like it, Bax said, shifting from his usual position of lazy repose. Or maybe I've just gone completely numb. Up above, the Zeathians weren't quite as pleased with the development. They've managed to shield themselves, Zorath noted. Impressive. Or just lucky, Ilorth suggested, though even he sounded a bit impressed. Either way, they're still standing. Persistent little creatures, Plorax commented. Like space barnacles. Back on Mercury, there was a palpable sense of relief, if not outright victory. They'd taken a hit, but they'd weathered the storm, for now at least. Seraph turned to her crew, a weary but genuine smile on her face. Not bad for a bunch of monkeys on a rock, huh? Skull snorted, shaking her head. If we're monkeys, you're the queen of the jungle. What's next, fearless leader? Next, Seraph replied, her voice steady and sure. We keep fighting. They've seen what we can do, and we've shown them we're not just going to roll over. But maybe we can take a little break first, Bax suggested hopefully. You know, before the next existential crisis. I suppose we've earned it, Jace said, flopping down into a chair with a sigh of relief. In the great cosmic fishbowl above, the Zeathians watched, their curiosity unabated. The humans had proven once again that they were not to be underestimated. They were a strange, unpredictable species, and that unpredictability made them both fascinating and formidable. They'll be back at it tomorrow, Ilorth noted, though there was a hint of admiration in his tone. Yes, Zorath agreed, contemplating the humans with a newfound respect. And so will we. And so, As another day came to a close on Mercury's barren landscape, the crew of the research base took a moment to savor their small victory. It wasn't much and it wouldn't last, but it was theirs. And for a bunch of stubborn earthlings stuck in the oven, that was more than enough. In the end, it was the human spirit, defiant, irreverent, and impossibly resilient, that kept them going. They might not have all the answers, but they had the courage to keep looking, and maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. For Seraph and her crew, each day was a new battle, and they'd face whatever cosmic chaos came their way with humor, determination, and a stubborn refusal to back down. Because in the grand scheme of things, surviving against the odds was its own kind of victory. And for the Zeathians watching from above, it was clear that these humans, with their strange mix of humor and grit, were a force to be reckoned with. They might not be perfect, but they were undeniably fascinating. And maybe, just maybe, they were worth keeping an eye on. So the day ended as it often did, with the crew of the Mercury research base looking to the stars, unbowed and unbroken, ready to face whatever cosmic chaos tomorrow might bring. Because in the grand scheme of things, surviving against the odds was its own kind of victory. And for Seraph and her crew, that was more than enough. The day started like every other in the oven, with Captain Halcyon Seraph trying to figure out if her headaches were from Zeathian interference or just the hangover from last night's attempt at space moonshine. "Another day, another migraine," she muttered, strapping herself into the console chair. Her brain felt like it was trying to claw its way out of her skull. "Doctor." Mira Skull shuffled in, bleary-eyed, cradling a cup of something that might have once been coffee, or an engine degreaser. "Morning, everyone," she said, which was optimistic, given the circumstances. Jace was already fiddling with the console panel, looking like a man who'd given up on ever finding the instruction manual of life. "Morning. More like just barely surviving," he grumbled, jabbing at buttons with the enthusiasm of a sleep-deprived zombie. "Good news, gang," Bax announced, sprawling in a corner like he'd melted there. "Weather forecast says there's a 0% chance of rain on Earth, so we're looking at dry flushes for the foreseeable future." "Fantastic," Seraph said, rolling her eyes. "Guess we'll have to keep holding it until humanity figures out how to control the weather." Speaking of control, Dr. Thane Larkspur, the station's resident neuroscientist, strode in, his eyes gleaming with the sort of manic energy that said he'd either found a eureka moment or misplaced a few screws. Given the setting, either was possible. "I might have something that can help with our little telepathic predicament." "Oh, great," Skull said with a sarcastic drawl, leaning against an array of switches. "Another dose of false hope to wash down with our despair." "No, really," Larkspur insisted, his hair sticking out in all directions like he'd been electrocuted. "I've been working on a way to channel our good old human emotions into a defensive barrier." "Think of it as an emotional force field." Bax raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And what emotions are we talking about here? The constant existential dread or the fleeting joy from a functioning coffee machine?" "A bit of both, actually," Larkspur replied. "Turns out our emotions are like unpredictable fireworks, chaotic, volatile, and perfect for throwing off Zeathian mental attacks if harnessed correctly." "Sounds like a solid plan," Jace said, sarcasm dripping from his words. "What do we do? Strap ourselves into a chair and start crying about our childhoods?" "Close," Larkspur said, a grin spreading across his face. "We just need to amplify and direct the emotional energy. With the right setup, we can create a mental feedback loop that's like a telepathic taser." Seraph gave a resigned nod. "Fine, let's give it a shot. After all, what's the worst that could happen, besides everything blowing up in our faces?" Skull sighed, setting her datapad aside. "You know, a nice boring job where I didn't have to worry about my brain turning into oatmeal would have been nice. But then you wouldn't have the pleasure of my company," Seraph replied, flashing a grin. "Let's get to it, team." With the kind of duct tape ingenuity only desperate humans could muster, the crew set to work on Larkspur's contraption. Branched wires, blinking lights, and a device that looked suspiciously like a potato battery formed the heart of the operation. "All hooked up," Jace said, wiping his brow with a sleeve that probably hadn't seen soap in weeks. "Larkspur, you sure this thing won't fry our neurons?" "About as sure as I can be with this much caffeine in my system," Larkspur replied, which wasn't exactly comforting. "All right, people," Seraph said, strapping herself in. "Brace for either glory or a spectacular failure." In the cosmic fishbowl above, Zorath watched the human antics with a mix of confusion and amusement. "What are they doing now?" "Something unconventional," Ilorth replied, as usual, not especially invested in the details. Plorax adjusted his station's readouts, curious despite himself. "They can't possibly think this will work." Below, Larkspur activated the machine, the hum of electricity mingling with the low buzz of human anxiety. All around them the air seemed to thicken, crackling with the tension of an emotional tempest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air shimmered, and a wave of relief washed over the crew as the oppressive weight on their minds lifted slightly. "I'll be damned," Skull said, blinking in surprise. "How's it look from up there?" Seraph asked, staring at the monitor as emotional readings spiked in a rainbow of chaos. "It's holding," Jace confirmed, awe creeping into his voice. "Take that, Zeathians," Bax said, suddenly animated. "We'll out-crazy your mind tricks with our own emotional baggage." The makeshift barrier was crude but effective. The Zeathian telepathic assault weakened like trying to punch through gelatin. "Persistent little creatures," Plorax observed, a note of respect seeping into his telepathic commentary. "Looks like they're not just stubborn," Zorath mused. "They're resourceful." Back in the oven, the crew basked in their small victory, relief palpable. "Nice work, Larkspur," Seraph said. "Might be the first time I'm glad someone brought their emotional issues to work." "Can't believe our baggage turned out to be our secret weapon," Jace said, leaning back with a rare smile. "Never underestimate the power of unresolved issues," Skull quipped, tapping at her datapad to log the unexpected success. For a brief, shining moment, the crew allowed themselves to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to beat back the Zeathian mental pranks for good. "All right, folks," Seraph said, trying to tamp down the rising optimism before it got out of hand. "We've got a temporary shield. Let's not get cocky." "Who's cocky?" Bax said, his grin wide. "I'm just relieved I won't be hallucinating giant space chickens today." "One day at a time," Skull agreed, though her expression was lighter than it had been in weeks. "Meanwhile, we'll keep refining," Larkspur added, already scribbling notes on a battered datapad. "With adjustments, this could be our new standard defense." "Well, until the Zeathians find a way to make our emotions implode," Jace chuckled, shaking his head. "I always said my emotions would be the death of me, but I didn't think it was so literal." Even Ilorth, usually indifferent, found himself intrigued by the humans' clever workaround. "They have a tenacity that's almost admirable." "Almost?" Zorath asked, half joking. Ilorth shrugged. "Don't want to give them too much credit. Wouldn't want them getting ideas." And so, the humans continued their work under the oppressive heat of Mercury, buoyed by the knowledge that their ingenuity, haphazard though it might be, had given them a fighting chance, even if only for a day. Seraph watched as her crew went about their routines with renewed energy. Maybe it was the emotional feedback loop, or maybe it was just the sheer stubbornness of humanity, but they were holding their own. For now. The day wound down, the crew settling into the strange rhythm of survival. There were no guarantees, no promises of easy days ahead, but for now they were alive, and they were free to fight another day. As the artificial lights dimmed in the base's corridors, Seraph found herself looking out at the distant stars, feeling the weight of countless tomorrows pressing down on her shoulders. "We'll get through this," she promised herself, her words barely a whisper. One way or another. Elsewhere, the Zeathians regrouped, conferring in their strange, inscrutable language. They were a species of watchers, of manipulators, and the humans had proven to be anything but predictable. "They will continue to surprise us," Zorath said, not without a hint of admiration. Ilorth nodded, reluctantly agreeing. They are persistent, I'll give them that. Plorax merely watched, silent and contemplative, as the humans continued their struggle against a world that seemed determined to break them. And thus, the story of the Mercury research base continued, caught between two worlds, two species, and the relentless march of time. But for now, the humans had eked out a victory, small and fleeting though it may be, and that was enough to keep them going. In the emptiness of space, where stars twinkled with cold indifference, humanity stood defiant, their irrepressible spirit shining brighter than any celestial beacon. Because in the end, it wasn't the technology, the science, or even the intuition that defined them. It was their unyielding resilience, their ability to laugh in the face of doom, and the joy they found in the absurdity of it all. And for Captain Halcyon Seraph and her crew, that was more than enough to face another day in the oven, under the watchful eyes of the universe. Captain Halcyon Seraph rubbed her temples, trying to massage away the headache that had been threatening to split her skull since breakfast, or what passed for breakfast in the oven. Call it Zeathian interference or call it hangover, it was like having tiny, malicious creatures tap dancing on her brain. Somewhere across the room, Bax was sprawled in his usual corner, looking like a well-dressed corpse complete with sarcastic commentary. "Still no rain," Bax announced, pointing at the monitor with all the enthusiasm of a man pointing out dog crap on a sidewalk. "Which means the toilet remains a dry dock." "Great," Seraph muttered, her voice as flat as the Mercury landscape. "Add plumbing to the list of things that hate us. Doctor." Mira Skull, bleary-eyed and hunched over her array of switches, was nursing something that passed for coffee but looked more like liquid despair. "At least the telepathic storm has died down a bit," she said, her voice a deadpan monotone. "Our emotional force field isn't total crap." "You mean it actually works?" Jace piped up from behind the console panel, his eyes red and puffy like he'd spent the night cuddling a bottle of synthetic whiskey. Jace had the unique ability to look sleep-deprived, and yet somehow manage a sense of purpose, like a raccoon on a caffeine high. "Not total crap," Larkspur corrected, walking in with the unsteady gait of a man who'd spent too long inhaling something that wasn't fresh air. His hair was an explosion of static and bad decisions. "Just mildly effective crap. We're like a telepathic mosquito net, annoying but not impenetrable." "Good enough for now," Seraph said, determined to cling to whatever scrap of good news she could. "Let's see if we can push them back." In the cosmic fishbowl above, Zorath and Ilorth were observing, their usual aloofness tempered with a hint of intrigue at the humans' antics. Plorax, meanwhile, was furiously analyzing data, possibly wondering if humans were just a particularly annoying form of cosmic bacteria. "They're adapting," Zorath noted, a tinge of respect in his telepathic tone. "Resourceful little things. Or just stubborn," Ilorth replied with a mental shrug. "They do love to complicate the simple." Back on the Mercury research base, the humans were indeed complicating things, as was their way. Seraph gathered her team around, a ragtag group of mismatched uniforms and mismatched personalities. "All right, we know the Zeathians weren't prepared for us to fling our emotional baggage at them like it's some cosmic pie fight," Seraph began, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Let's see just how far we can push it. We could crank up the emotional feedback," Skull suggested, tapping her datapad like it owed her money. "See if we can give them a taste of human neurosis at full blast. Telepathic overdrive." Larkspur's eyes lit up at the thought. "I love it. Let's give them a cocktail of anger, fear, and sheer bloody-minded resilience. And a dash of existential dread for flavor," Bax added, grinning like a loon. "Let's hope they are allergic," Jace said, his fingers dancing over the console like a pianist at a post-apocalyptic recital. With their makeshift emotional weapon primed, the crew prepared to unleash the full might of human psyche, warts and all, on their Zeathian observers. It was an audacious plan, one that relied on the fundamental unpredictability and chaos of human emotion. If the Zeathians wanted to play mind games, well, they were about to find out humans had more games than a casino on payday. "Ready?" Seraph asked, eyeing her team. They nodded, expressions ranging from eager to "what the hell are we doing," but united in purpose. "Let's do this," she said, her voice steady. Larkspur activated the system, and the air hummed with a symphony of human insanity. Rage, hope, despair, joy. Each emotion a note in an orchestra only humanity could conduct. In the skies above, Zorath and his companions were caught off guard as the wave of raw emotion hit them like a freight train. It was a sensory overload they hadn't anticipated, a cacophony of feelings that scrambled their well-ordered thoughts into a mental mush. "What is this?" Plorex exclaimed, his composure cracking for the first time. "I can't focus. Seems they've weaponized their chaos," Zorath mused, struggling to maintain his mental equilibrium. "Unexpected." "Unexpected is an understatement," Ilorth replied, clearly discomfited by the intrusion. "It's like being inside a storm." Back on Mercury, the humans watched as their emotional onslaught took effect. The Zeathian telepathic interference weakened further, the once oppressive pressure lifting like a heavy fog dissipating under the morning sun. "Holy hell," Skull breathed, disbelief mingling with triumph. "It's actually working." "Told you our neuroses would save the day," Jace quipped, leaning back in his chair with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "For now, at least," Seraph said, never one to count her chickens, giant space or otherwise, before they hatched. "Keep the pressure on." The Zeathians, caught in the telepathic storm of humanity's making, had little choice but to retreat. Their elegant, cerebral defenses were no match for the primal force of raw emotion, a fact that galled them even as it forced them to yield. "Persistent bastards," Plorex muttered, acknowledging the humans' tenacity even as he recalibrated their strategy. "They won't make it easy for us." "Let's fall back," Zorath decided, gathering his composure with a telepathic sigh. "We'll need a new plan." Back in the oven, a cheer went up as the Zeathian presence receded, leaving the humans in a temporary state of peace. Their victory was fragile, a house built on sand, but for the moment it held. "Well, that was something," Bax said, his tone a mix of amusement and surprise. "Turns out being a hot mess has its advantages." "Never underestimate the power of dysfunction," Skull replied, her fingers dancing over her datapad in a victory jig. Seraph allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. It wasn't a definitive win, but it was a step in the right direction. "Let's not get too comfortable," she warned. "They'll be back with something new." "Yeah, but so will we," Larkspur said, already planning the next iteration of their emotional defense system. "We'll just keep adapting until they can't keep up." "That's the spirit," Seraph agreed, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease ever so slightly. "We've got a long road ahead, but at least we're not walking it alone." As the crew settled back into their routines, buoyed by the knowledge that they'd bought themselves some time, Seraph took a moment to reflect. They were a motley crew, thrown together by circumstance and held together by sheer stubbornness, but they'd proven they could hold their own against the odds. For now, the oven was their home, and they'd defend it with everything they had, flaws, neuroses, and all. It was a darkly humorous, chaotic existence, but it was theirs. And as long as they were together, they'd keep fighting, keep adapting, and keep finding new ways to survive in a universe that seemed determined to test them at every turn. Because in the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could still find a way to laugh, to hope, and to persevere. And that, Seraph thought with a wry smile, was worth more than all the technology in the universe. Captain Halcyon Seraph leaned back in her chair, the distant hum of the emotional force field still vibrating in her ears like the lingering buzz of an unwelcome alarm clock. They'd done it, thrown the Zeathians off balance with nothing but the raw, chaotic mess of human emotion. Who'd have thought that centuries of accumulated neurosis would finally be useful? As the crew of the Mercury research base, affectionately known as the Oven, basked in their temporary victory, Seraph couldn't help but feel a tinge of pride. They were a ragtag bunch, each one of them as broken and patched together as the station itself, but they'd managed to hold off an alien mind assault with little more than stubbornness and emotional baggage. "Well, that was a fun little dance," Bax quipped, still sprawled in his corner, somewhere between a nap and consciousness. "I mean, if your idea of fun involves being mentally waterboarded by your own species. Better than the alternative," Seraph replied, massaging her temples. The headache had subsided to a dull throb, a small mercy she attributed to the Zeathians' retreat. Either that or her brain had just decided to give up the fight. "Looks like they weren't ready for our brand of crazy. It's official, Doctor," Mira Skull announced, sipping her sludge masquerading as coffee. "Our dysfunction is a defensive asset. Finally, something to tell my shrink," Larkspur chimed in, his hair still looking like it had been styled by a particularly disgruntled electrical socket. "Turns out my issues have interstellar applications." Jace, perpetually in a state of half-sleep, grinned from the console. "Makes you wonder what else we could weaponize." "Sarcasm, passive aggression, don't tempt fate," Seraph cautioned. She glanced at the monitor where the Zeathian blips were fading into the void, reassessing their approach. "Let's not poke the cosmic bear unless we have to." With the immediate threat gone, a semblance of normalcy, well, as normal as life got on a boiling hot hunk of rock, returned to the oven. Still, Seraph knew it wasn't over. The Zeathians would regroup, recalibrate, and come back with something even more irritating than telepathic pranks. "All right, people," she said, standing up and pulling her team's attention away from the comforting glow of their screens. "Let's figure out how to keep them at bay and keep our sanity intact, assuming we have any left," Bax muttered, earning a chuckle from the others. As the crew began to discuss their next steps, each member contributing their own flavor of cynicism and creativity, Seraph felt a strange wave of optimism. Not the naive kind that believed everything would work out, more like the grim satisfaction that came from knowing they'd survived another day in a universe that seemed hell-bent on rubbing them out. "You know," Skull said, peering over her datapad, "if we can refine the emotional force field, we might be able to find a way to communicate directly with the Zeathians." "Communicate?" Jace raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "What, like open a dialogue exactly?" Skull nodded. "We've been reacting to their interference, but maybe it's time we take a proactive approach." "A diplomatic solution," Larkspur mused, rubbing his chin with the air of a man who's come face to face with an intriguing puzzle. "We could invite them over for tea and telepathic trauma." "Why not?" Seraph said, leaning back, considering the possibility. "If we can't beat them with emotional warfare, maybe we can just confuse them with our hospitality. Or, at the very least, we can tell them where to shove their telepathic storms," Bax interjected, ever the voice of sardonic reason. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Seraph cautioned. "First, we need to make sure our defenses hold." With a renewed sense of purpose, the crew set to work. Each of them buried themselves in their tasks, eager to fortify the base's systems and ensure that their emotional armory was as potent as possible. They knew their time was limited and that the Zeathians would return, likely with new tricks up their proverbial sleeves. "Hey, Skull," Jace called from his station. "Think we can rig some kind of emotional overload alarm?" "You know, before we start leaking feelings all over the place." "Already on it," she replied, fingers flying over her datapad. "If the emotional levels spike, we'll get a warning. Last thing we need is to go full-on soap opera. And here I was hoping to unleash my inner diva," Larkspur lamented, flashing a mock pout. "Save it for when we really need to scare them off," Seraph said with a grin. "We've got to be strategic with our theatrics." Hours passed in a blur of activity, each member of the crew focused on their piece of the puzzle. Seraph watched them work, a fondness blooming in her chest for this band of misfits. They might not have chosen each other, but they were bound by their shared experiences, their triumphs and their fears. Bax, ever the practical one, was busy ensuring their water supply was functioning, at least the bits that didn't rely on rainfall. Still no rain, he reported with a shrug, but I think we can manage with the reserves. Just don't expect long showers or functioning toilets, Jace added, tapping at his console. We're going to smell great. Maybe it'll keep the Zeathians at bay, Larkspur suggested. Natural deterrent. Let's focus on defenses rather than odors, Seraph ordered, trying not to think about how much they all probably stank after days in the oven without a proper wash. As the hours ticked by, Skull's plan to open a channel with the Zeathians began to take shape. It was a gamble, sure, but one that could potentially shift the balance of power in their favor. We're ready, Skull announced, a note of excitement in her voice. We can send a signal piggybacked on the telepathic waves. Think they'll answer? Jace asked, skeptical as always. Only one way to find out, Seraph replied. Let's give it a shot. With a nod, Skull initiated the sequence, sending their message out into the void. It was a simple transmission, a basic greeting coupled with a request for dialogue. As they waited for a response, tension filled the air. Each second stretched into an eternity, the silence more oppressive than any telepathic storm. Seraph tapped her foot, impatience thrumming through her veins. Finally, the monitor blinked to life, a new signal appearing on the screen. It was the Zeathians responding. Well, I'll be damned, Bax muttered, sitting up straighter. They answered. Let's see what they have to say, Seraph said, her voice steady despite the anticipation coiling in her stomach. The signal resolved into a telepathic transmission, filling their minds with the measured, curious tone of Zorath. You surprise us, humans. This is unexpected. Guess we're full of surprises, Seraph replied, her mental voice carrying the weight of hard-won skepticism. Didn't think we'd just sit and take your telepathic pranks, did you? We underestimated your resilience, Zorath admitted, not without a touch of respect. Perhaps we can find a way to coexist without conflict. Wouldn't that be nice? Skull said, a hint of hope in her tone. There's a lot about us you don't know, Seraph added, but we're willing to talk if you are. A pause followed, the Zeathians contemplating the offer. Finally, Zorath's voice returned, a mental nod of agreement. We are willing. Let us explore this possibility, and just like that, the potential for peace glimmered on the horizon, a fragile, delicate thing easily shattered but worth pursuing nonetheless. As the conversation continued, Seraph felt a shift in the air, a cautious optimism settling over the crew. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. They had a long road ahead, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but for the first time it felt like they might actually be on the right path. They'd faced the chaos, wielded their insanity like a weapon, and come out stronger for it. In the vast, indifferent cosmos, they'd found a way to stand their ground, even if that ground was a scorched piece of rock spinning too close to a sun. And as Seraph looked around at her crew, each of them scarred and flawed, she knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Because in this strange, unpredictable universe, they were more than just survivors. They were explorers, pioneers, and perhaps most importantly, a family bound by shared madness and an unyielding will to endure. Here's to the next chapter, Seraph said, raising her makeshift mug in a toast. May it be as insane as the last. Laughter echoed through the oven, mingling with the electronic beeps and hums of their equipment. It was the sound of unity, of hope born from adversity, and it was enough to carry them forward into whatever came next. Because if there was one thing they'd learned, it was that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't face. Together, they'd continue to defy the odds and find their place among the stars.